I've not released one of these in a couple of weeks now, as I've been mostly focusing on DOS and Halloween videos, but I'm back, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. Let's see what else came out in 1996 for Windows. I remember reading about Cyber Gladiators back in the day and learning how great of a game it was, both in how it played and its presentation. The Macs, at least those I had access to, praised it as the next great fighter and an amazing 3D entry into the genre. What I'm gonna say here today will contradict all that, because I feel that Cyber Gladiators is and was a little poor. Why little? Because there's so many bigger ones out there. Anyway, the story behind it is beyond stupid, and to prove it I will actually quote it verbatim from Moby Games. In a freak accident, Alliance members of the Gaijin terrorist attack were transformed into Cyber Gladiators, a powerful cyborg fighting force. Powerful Gaijin members in prison were also transformed into Cyber Gladiators. When the Gaijin Cyber Gladiators escaped from prison, they faced a showdown with the Alliance. In this game, you can fight on the side of the Alliance or the Gaijin in this futuristic cyborg fighting game. Now, how did it sound to you? I've read it like 5 times and I still have no clue what it's all about, who the opposing sides are and what their motivation is. I understand nothing. Don't worry though, as it's largely irrelevant because it's a fighter. It features 8 cyber warriors to pick from, well 10 if you unlock the additional 2 that are initially bosses, and they can all fight it out on a boring-ass backgroundless arenas. What's more, they're not very attractive or distinctive looking, and their special moves are not fun to pull off. And all that mostly because of how dark the game is. I can't see anything in detail. Can you? It's not crappy footage folks, that's how it looked like, and the fact that it supported 3D accelerators did not change it whatsoever. It was, is and will be dark. And to me it looks like a game played on a broken screen. If you really wanna play a great fighter from 1996 or before, why not go for Mortal Kombat 1 and 2, or Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, or even better, pick one from 1997 and play Virtua Fighter. It was a blast. Deadly Tide is a full-motion video on-rails sci-fi shooter. It takes place in the not-so-distant future with a premise that aliens invaded Earth, took hold of the oceans, and from within they attacked our ships and began process of raising sea levels to drown us out. Now, I like to wet my toe from time to time, same as any other guy does, in the ocean for a little while if you will, but on my own terms. When, how and where I want to. Not out of nowhere and under oppressive alien rule. So, since I can't stand for it, no, I won't stand for it, I have to ask you, my dear viewer, to once again do what needs to be done. I know, it's another species you'll bring into the brink of extinction, but you'll save us all by driving them off the planet, so it's gotta be worth it, right? What I have for you here is this super duper extra turbo underwater combat vehicle, basically unlimited supply of ammo and Mr. Potato Head trophy if you come back a winner. So, will you do it? Excellent. Deadly Tide is too. Excellent, that is. It's beautiful, it features tons of great looking and meaty sounding explosions and countless bodies to dispose of. Sure, as most on-rail shooters, you're basically taken on a ride with no input on how to steer your underwater craft, but at least that leaves you with all your attention for shooting and destroying as many of the grey scum as possible. Though I'm not really convinced that they're grey. Deadly Tide is not a long game, its story is not too deep and not overly developed, leaving you feeling a bit underwhelmed. But if you like the genre, it's probably one of the better games that it ever spawned in terms of pure fun. Even if it's on the shorter side, as it can be completed in just under 3 hours. Deathkeep is what I call my current boss's office. It's dark, extremely cold regardless of the time of the year, and has that odd smell that foretells the impending doom. But Deathkeep is also a first-person fantasy action role-playing heavily based on Dungeons and Dragons that feels kinda like FPS, but without much of the S. Okay, that doesn't sound how I wanted it to. Nevertheless, I don't really know why I said that, cause games like Daggerfall or Ultima Underworld shared the gameplay mechanics with Deathkeep, and I never felt like that about them. So perhaps disregard that one comment of mine. Anyway, before you dropped into the dark world of Deathkeep, you have to pick one of 3 pre-made characters to play as. Dwarven Fighter is strong melee close combat fighter with a very limited in strength, ranged X throw attack and almost no magic. Half-Elven Ranger is mostly ranged combatant, spending most of his time pew-pewing the arrows left and right, and from time to time engaging in a bit of melee combat, at which he's not great but also not terrible. He has some magical abilities too, but they're unimpressive at best. And finally, Elven Mage specializing in magical combat and defensive spells, and he learns the new ones as he's leveling up. He has no non-magical ranged attacks, and his melee stuff attacks are laughable at best and an absolute joke at worst. So from the get-go you're given a choice of 3 entirely different gameplay styles, which is nice since the game world doesn't really change at all on consecutive playthroughs. Story-wise, an evil necromancer, not that there are any good ones really, or are there? If you know of one, let me know in the comments below. So, the necromancer took over the castle and you have to defeat him. To do so, however, you have to find 3 magical orbs within 25 huge dungeon levels and then face him. Sounds like fun? Good, but it really isn't. I'd like to retract my former retraction of my earlier comment. I know, I'm messing with your head now, but hear me out. I've been thinking about it as I was talking, and I'd like to modify what I initially said. So, Deathkeep is a FPS RPG, but with little less and even less RP. So it's FPG. Yep, first, I coined the term. I bet Guinness World of Records can't wait to add me to their next edition if they even still exist. I hope they do. Anyway, Deathkeep is not great. I don't really know why I've kept you for so long dancing around the subject, but I won't anymore. It's a first-person action game pretending to be role-playing solely based on the D&D license, and crawling with numerous issues. From poor graphics and sound design, through terrible controls, all the way to uninspired plot. I'd skip it if I were you, despite it even being made by SSI, cause it may shake your belief in the quality of the games that they released. Hard Trilogy is based on the first 3 movies in the series and is a compilation of 3 differently playing sections, one per movie. First, Die Hard is a third-person action adventure where you have to scale the famous Nakatomi Tower, shooting buddies and saving hostages. So you'll be fighting through 30 action-packed levels and not only going through office floors, but also construction, maintenance and executive levels too. This part of the game is what first comes to mind whenever I think of Die Hard games. You're armed with unlimited ammo pistol, machine gun and grenades. The latter 2 are not unlimited though, so you'll need to seek and pick up refills for them. The second, Die Hard 2 Die Harder, is a non-rail shooter similar to Virtua Cop. It takes place in and around Washington Dulles Airport and is quite fun if I say so myself. Perhaps not as fun as games specializing in a genre, but fun nonetheless. This second mode also features weapon upgrades and they need to be shot to be collected and equipped. They either have limited ammo or can be used until you get shot. The destructible environments are all around and that's always fun. And finally, third part of the game is Die Hard with a Vengeance, where you race through New York in various vehicles, locating bombs and disarming them before they explode. A strict timer is displayed and running, counting down time to the next explosion, and the game points you in general direction you should be going with arrows. All of the bombs are hidden inside everyday generic side street objects like lampposts, benches, etc. and are disarmed by ramming them. Now, that's a game logic that does not feel like a game design method from 1996, but something straight from 1986 at best. But it is what it is. Each defused bomb activates the timer on the next one, rinse and repeat. Every now and then you'll encounter a mini-boss in the form of a bomb car that need to be rammed plenty enough times till its life bar is depleted. Power-ups like jump, turbo or extra time are collected by running them over, and overall, this section, same as the other 2, is pretty darn fun. All 3 game modes, games or however you wanna look at them, use a mix of 3D and 2D in their presentation, majority of which is done in the more and more popular by 1996 3-dimensional view, and with some occasional objects presented as 2D sprites. Die Hard Trilogy is easy to recommend cause not only you get to relive the 3 movies playing as John McClane, but they also play pretty well if you like action-packed arcade titles. Dragon's Lair 2 Time Warp is a follow-up to earlier arcade title. I'm not big on those quick time events based games, so I'll be brief here. Once again, you're Dirk the Daring, and once again you must rescue Princess Daphne. You'd think that after first kidnapping, security at the castle would be heightened or something, but clearly lesson was not learned. Anyway, this time an evil wizard Mordok kidnapped her through Wrinkle in Time, and it's up to Brave and Dash and you to find and recover her safely. Graphically, Dragon's Lair once again is incredible, being series of super fluid FMV sequences and simply looks amazing. Same can be said about sound design, it's stellar too and well fitting to the nerve-wracking gameplay, which is as demanding as in the original. This time featuring longer sequences that needed to be repeated in case of a failure. On the upside, whenever your input is required, the game flashes in yellow, often even in the direction that you need to take, so that's something that's at the very least helpful and an improvement over the previous outing. Other than that, it's the same repeatable QuickTime event bonanza from start to finish. And if you manage to pull the whole game off in one sitting, which I doubt that you will, then completing all it has to offer will take you half an hour at most. So if you like those types of games, this one's great. If you don't, then it's not different enough to change your mind about them. Dragonheart Fire and Steel is a tie-in for the movie of the same title and a side-scrolling fantasy-themed beat-em-up with some platforming areas and digitized graphics. And for once, it's a better game than the movie was. It doesn't mean that it's a great one, but it's not as bad. You play as Bowen, who aims to rid the world of an evil King Ainon, and 7 as-evil dragons. These all rule the world with an iron fist or fiery breath, depending if you're talking about the king or flying reptiles. And they all need to be disposed of for the world to recover. On your adventure you befriend one of the dragons, Draco, who not only ends up being good, but will also help you on your mission spanning 9 big levels. You'll fight various differently looking enemies and even some of the dragons. You have a sword and shield and bow and arrow. And the latter duo, given that you have different kinds of arrows, is also used in some simple puzzling. Combat is rather basic, no complicated moves or specials, but it's not bad. Obviously not on the level of games like those seen in the arcades, but good enough to drive you through the entire experience to its very end. And the fact that it's rather bloody also made it more appealing to the youth of 1996 that still suffered from that unescapable Mortal Kombat fever. I wouldn't go out of my way to find Dragonheart if I were you, but if you have it already or can download it from somewhere, it may be worth a playthrough or two. Drowned God Conspiracy of the Ages is a first-person point-and-click adventure game similar in how it looks to Myst. Yep, another of those Myst-like games. As story goes, we have been created and genetically modified by the aliens, who by all accounts to us must have seemed like gods. So, we were their fishes in the aquarium, effectively having a free roam within its constraints and being able to develop the way we please. To a certain degree, that is. As they were historically nudging us from behind the scenes towards certain artifacts of power like the Ark of the Covenant, the Philosopher's Stone, the Rod of Osiris and the Holy Grail. You have been sent through time and space to find and gather them all, and in the process solve the mysteries surrounding their existence. That is the gist of it. And if you think that's weird, the full and not redacted story is even more convoluted and often feeling out of place or even like a psychedelic mess. I mean, I think it touches at least most, if not all of the conspiracy theories that you could think of, perhaps even some that you never heard about. And by you, I mean me, and just assume we may be on the same page here. Still, this weirdness and lack of apparent direction may be a wall just a bit too tall for many gamers to want to tackle, and they may end up abandoning the game long before the end. Drowned God is full of various logical puzzles, and unlike its story, they are pretty smart and will require no trial and error as long as you give them your full attention. Most of them will be solved as they are, without the need for inventory juggling, which in games like that is definitely a plus. Overall, Drowned God is a mixed bag. On one hand, it features very nice graphics and sounds for the time, on the other, it's chock full of bits and pieces of story that are both tiring to follow and not great when you do either, proving only that the great game is a product that all pieces of fall into place, forming a complete puzzle. And when one piece is too big, too small, or as in case of this game half of them come from completely different puzzles, then forming a finished picture may be impossible. The X-Ball was my most favorite Arkanoid-like game on PC, and along with its follow-up the X-Ball 2, it probably still is to this day. The game was developed using Amiga's Mega Ball as a blueprint, and ended up being excellent and arguably better than the game it was based on. It follows the typical Arkanoid formula of destroying bricks at the top of the screen arranged in various patterns, with a ball that bounces off the paddle that you control. Simple stuff really. Simple, but addicting. Especially that there's 50 levels in the game, various kinds of bricks, so ones that explode, invisible ones that are revealed upon being hit with a ball, and those that require a few hits to be destroyed, among others. There are also numerous typical for the genre power-ups like extra ball, multi-ball, guns for the paddle, sticky paddle, and change of its size to name a few. What I'm trying to say here is that the X-Ball is as good of an Arkanoid clone as they could be in 1996. And while some may prefer the classic games from the earlier systems, and I do understand the appeal, really, the X-Ball will always be special to me. Not only because it was the first Arkanoid-like game on PC that I would actively play for hours, but also as it was a title I played with a buddy of mine in high school for points. We used to quote-unquote train, each in their own respective houses, and then meet for a, well, let's say non-alcoholic beverage and compete for points. We've stayed in contact throughout our time at our respective unis. And then after, I left for UK and stayed there for 8 years. As I was there, he died in a car crash. He was a passenger and the driver was supposedly under the influence, so there's a sad lesson in that. He was a good dude and he passed away way too early. But the X-Ball always reminds me of him somehow. Earthsiege 2 is a follow-up to the first game, expanding its concepts quite considerably. The war between cybrids and human resistance has reignited once more, and you, being the hero of the universe that you are sent to pilot one of our huge mechs, known as Herc, against the evil cybrids. This time the game features 9 entirely different Hercs to choose from, and even an aircraft to use in some missions. While the missions in Earthsiege 2 are quite fun, the briefings for them are a bit too long and tend to feel a tad boring sometimes. The sounds are excellent, all the shots and explosions are appropriately loud and meaty and really make you feel as if you were there, inside that mech. Graphics are on the same level, way better than what we'd get to see in a more well-known and arguably better MechWarrior 2. The 3D environment is very impressive for the time and easily one of the better graphical capabilities show-off of 1996. Now, with all that out of the way, how's Earthsiege 2 as a game? It's not bad if you like mech games, that is. It's perhaps not as fun as the aforementioned MechWarrior 2 is, but if it's all you have, you're not gonna find yourself complaining about it. The only thing that's really lacking other than the universe that MechWarrior has established over decades is lack of mouse turret control, which may seem like a very small annoyance, but if you ever aimed with a mouse, you'll know that neither joystick or keyboard could ever compare in terms of accuracy and reaction speed. Earthsiege 2 is a game that fans of the genre will no doubt enjoy, and others can skip without worrying that they've missed something exceptional. Empire 2: The Art of War could be considered a final and best version of earlier Empire Deluxe, so a turn-based strategy wargame covering eras from Neolithic to Space Age, and built with customization in mind. It featured many scenarios like Battle of Arbela that took place in 331 BCE, Battle of Leopanto from 1571 and Battle of Antium of 1862 to name a few. But all the rule sets to each of the missions could be heavily modified to create numerous interesting what-if scenarios, and tackle the famous battles in completely new, often historically impossible conditions. Even more so, Empire 2 included a built-in editor, which not only allowed for creation of user maps and scenarios, which already was a lot of added value, but you could also make your own units, including their statistics and graphical design. It was a de facto literally a strategy game building engine, in which given time and some thought put behind, you could recreate any combat scenario, be it realistic or the opposite, rooted in sci-fi. That's how powerful the editing software of Empire 2 was. Other than that, it also added a touch of realism, allowing units to be damaged in the skirmish rather than just simply winning or losing, so being destroyed entirely. There's a simple morale system in Play 2 that can cause units to retreat if it's too low, regardless of your orders. And finally, reinforcements were added on specific preset turns, taking weather conditions in mind to round up the realism update. Some might consider it a small change, but along with the editor, it was a huge step forward for the game. And while it made it feel more like an engine rather than just a game, it also came with its own big issue, namely lack of proper documentation for the editor, which resulted in extremely powerful tool being underused or even entirely ignored by the users, heavily reducing the game's worth in eyes of potential players. Evidence: The Last Report is a detective mystery adventure in which you play as Daniel Singer, a reporter for Channel Z. At the very beginning of the game, your girlfriend Sarah Hopkins is mysteriously and disdainfully murdered, and while you and her family are trying to understand what happened and grieve, you suddenly become a subject of suspicion of the murder. And as such, you will not only try to prove your innocence and find the killer, but will have to undergo a series of interrogations yourself. And they're not the high point of the game, I assure you. They're long, tiresome, and will not add to your investigation in any way other than the time that you waste participating. That said, I understand why they were added, or I assume that I know. It's to add to the realism, I think. Anyway, you've only few hours to find the real killer, as there are people in high places involved in the murder that will try to stop you. Most of the game is played in a typical for the genre point-and-clicking, with some occasional shoot-em-up and beat-em-up sequences. I'm not gonna lie, Evidence's production value is not great, the graphics are below par for 1996 and the voice acting is varied, from pretty good to terrible. But, and that's probably most important, if you like adventure games, Evidence's story is pretty gripping, dark and well told, so you should have a lot of fun playing it. Fable is a staple example of a good but not great point-and-click adventure. It takes everything that the genre is known for, it doesn't add anything extra, it doesn't force 3D into its presentation or many twists and turns into its story either. But the staple is well covered, resulting in very enjoyable and playable experience. Story is quite interesting too, even if mainly told in the introduction and barely touched throughout the rest of the game. It puts you in shoes of Quickthorpe, who is given a quest by his village priest and must find 4 mystical gemstones. They are said to have magical powers and partly control the nature. The priest plans to destroy them, making the world fully habitable for the villagers again. Each gem has a guardian in the form of a different creature and they must be defeated for it to be obtainable. As you go about your quest, you'll learn the world was once kept in an iron grip by the ancient race of creatures from another world called Mekubar, who caused the catastrophic event as they were leaving the planet, all to destroy the humanity. It's now up to you to figure out what the gemstones are really used for and can they be a key to saving the world. Now, as much as the plot seems to be dark and heavy, especially taking place in the world that is in ruin, the game is chock full of quirky British humor and for the most part it's actually pretty fun to go through and experience. Interestingly enough, there's actually 2 releases with 2 different endings. One of them, the original international release ending, is very dark and heavy and proves that all of the work that you've put in the game was in vain and that everything was not really what it seemed. It was criticized by the audiences as being depressing and not fitting to the rest of the gameplay, so the devs changed it for the North American release not only to be lighter, but also to be a happy end. It's hard to tell if that was the right choice, but it is what it is. The puzzles are for the most part inventory-based and pretty fun, hardly ever too difficult to leave you pondering on what to do. The sounds are pretty good too, especially the British narration that fits perfectly and highlights the humorous contrast between the light-hearted gameplay and dark overarching story. Graphics are pretty nice, well animated and in high resolution SVGA, adding a lot to the fun. So if you're a fan of adventure games, this one's not to miss, even if it's definitely no one's favorite game in the genre. Fatal Fury 3 Road to Final Victory is the first and last Fatal Fury to ever grace the Windows platform, and it's also an excellent one-on-one versus fighting game. Out of original cast of playable characters, only 5 remain. Bogart brothers, so Terry and Andy, Joe Higashi, Mai Shiranui, and Geese Howard. But they're supplemented by 5 completely new ones, for a round number of 10. They are Sokaku Mochizuki, a Japanese Buddhist monk, Bob Wilson, a capoeira master from Brazil, and that's the most Brazilian name and surname that I've ever heard. Then there's Honfu, a nunchaku-wielding cop from Hong Kong, Blue Mary, a blonde-haired agent and Terry's love interest, and Franco Bash, an Italian kickboxer. Other than the new warriors, Fatal Fury 3 introduced few other novelties, first being added a third plane of fighting, so you start the fight in the main, middle one, but as you battle your opponent, mowing him down with kicks, punches and other gymnastic and often fiery moves, you and them can jump into the background layer or out of it into the foreground one. It takes a bit getting used to if you're new to the series, but allows for a lot more strategy to the encounters than the standard format fighters do. Not everyone likes it, and while I'm not great at fighting games myself, I consider this mechanic to be really fun. You can also control the height of your jumps and block mid-air, which in hands of a skilled player is just fantastic. For me, it's just a stopgap better players would use to counter my attacks with ease. There's also a new hidden ability for each character that's a much stronger version of a regular super special move, but it can only be used once per round for balancing purposes. And finally, Fatal Fury also featured so-called fighting level system, awarding you score after each round and ranging from E to S, with S being the highest one. And based on your scores from previous rounds, the game will determine who will you face at the end of a single player mode. All of these add a lot to the replayability and prove how innovative and big of a franchise Fatal Fury really is. But even if single player is fun, the game is best in multiplayer against a friend, where it really spreads its wings. If you love fighters, it's easily one of the best in 1996 and probably overall in 90s on PC. FIFA Soccer 97, aka FIFA 97, is a fourth football game from Electronic Arts, second using their virtual stadium engine, and the first in the series that I've ever played on PC. I played 96 too, but later rather than earlier. It's also historically first football game from EA featuring fully polygonal players as opposed to 2D sprites. At the time of its release, it was really demanding title requiring a really beefy PC to run in high-res mode. I had an AMD K5 PR133, so a rough equivalent of Pentium 133, and it was sweaty in digits left and right running FIFA in high-res. For those who didn't own one, a low-res was still available, though looking considerably less presentable. But it ran like a charm even on those stronger 486 DXs. So that's not bad, right? David Ginola was used for motion capture and polygonal models, assuring lifelike for the time player's movement on the pitch. A new addition to the series was an indoor mode played in 6-a-side format, which while fun was not a long stay in the series. Commentary was provided by John Motson and Andy Gray, and Des Lynam was a presenter. Up to 20 players could play online via LAN and 8 using modem. Player squads from most European domestic leagues were included and were up to date for 1995-96 season. Now, let me make one thing clear. I don't care for sports, any of them really, apart maybe from Texas Hold'em poker. But I did spend quite a lot of time playing FIFA 97 with a buddy of mine over one summer, and I loved it. Firefight in development known as New Order was a Polish isometric 8-way scrolling shoot 'em up. It was conceptually based on earlier Strike series of games from EA, so Desert Strike, Jungle Strike and the likes. In fact, initially devs considered calling the game Future Strike, but eventually decided against it, fearing potential legal backlash. Which is odd, as EA was the publisher for the game, but I wasn't there, I didn't witness it, so don't know the inner dealings that took place. Maybe it was out of question. Unlike in most other games in Firefight, you don't play as a good guy. In fact, you're a real-life representation of a Grim Reaper, the executioner, the killer, the big bad, or however else you wanna call the heartless killer working for the quote-unquote system. In future, a Phantom Council rules the world, and they use collective responsibility against cities and countries that break the law. And you're the one who's executing Phantom Council's will. The game is composed out of 18 missions taking place on few planets and features 6 kinds of weapons, making for a very fun, even if a bit on a dark force side of things shooter. Despite the game receiving favorable scores in the mags that it had a chance to sample its gameplay, publisher did not spend any real time or money on its promotion, effectively causing its disappearance into obscurity basically weeks after it released. Which was disappointing, as both sounds and graphics were excellent and the gameplay loop was really enjoyable. Music was a bit of a letdown, being very monotonic and not well fitting, but hardly a reason to abandon the game with such a huge sales potential. Interestingly enough, Firefight was sold as a so-called multiplayer kit, meaning 2 copies of the game were in one retail box, allowing for multiplayer play basically from the get-go. 1996 is shaping up to be a fun year. We've seen some awesome games, and trust me when I say that there are some real bangers to come in the next few episodes too. So, how did you like today's selection? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed, and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting that bell, that is. And when you hit that bell, whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you a small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content, and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're amazing and stars among the retro community. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running, and also in the video description below. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.
You've been briefed. Shadow's here to help you with a shortcut to the processor. Lucky me.